Okay then, let's start then. Hi everyone, welcome to the Humanities Center for the fourth session in this series on the frozen realm. I'm actually very delighted. People kept saying to me, there's got to be something about Frozen in there, and I thought, oh no, I've messed it. And now, fortuitously, it appears. Following reflections on the scientific understanding of ice and coldness, we turn to humanistic ideas, principally those from the fields of music and literature. And it gives me, as always, great pleasure to introduce three marvelous colleagues and friends who have much of interest to share with us on this fascinating and icy theme. Christopher Adler was educated at MIT, where he received bachelor's degrees in both mathematics and music composition. He subsequently earned his PhD in composition at Duke University. He is a composer, performer, improviser, and, of course, professor of music here at USD. And he is director of composition for the Neath North Summer Festival, pianist for the ensemble Noise, and co-founder of the Sound On Festival of Modern Music. His most recent compositional recording, the remarkable Aeneas in the Underworld, was released at the end of last year, and he has, great delight to say this, just been selected as the 2024-25 Fulbright Scholar for South Korea. Fred Miller Robinson received his PhD from the University of Washington and is now Emeritus Professor of English. I think it is as of
I think that happened
Friday.
last week.
Yeah. And now Emeritus Professor of English, having been a member of faculty here at USD for 30 years, from 1991 to 2021. He's also been interim chair of the drama and music departments, and received the Davis Award for Teaching Excellence in 2002 and the Drinan Award for Service in 2016. Among his many publications are the books Rooms in Dramatic Realism, The Man in the Bowler Hat, and two superb books on comic theory, The Comedy of Language and Comic Moments. Lisa Smith was educated here at the University of San Diego, where she received her master's in English and has taught in the Department of English for over 30 years. Her specialisms lie in the areas of contemporary fiction, literature for children and adolescents, the Bildungsroman, and weird and uncanny fiction. Among the enormous range of classes she has taught are courses especially designed for future educators. And her seminar class, currently running, Stay or Stray, about the meanings of Little Red Riding Hood, is one of the true highlights of the Humanities Center programming this semester. So this all promises to be delightful. Please give a big, warm welcome to Chris Adler, Fred Robinson, and Lisa Smith.
All right, thank you, Brian. A couple things just to get started here. First of all, talking about music can always be a little bit tricky because the best way to understand and learn something about music is to listen to it, and that takes time away from talking about it. So I'm only going to be able to play excerpts of what I talk about today, and so I made a little website with the full examples. It's at that QR code, which I'll project again at the end of my talk. If you want to grab it, you can go back and listen to the pieces. And the second thing I'll point out is that I was sort of thinking about what to talk about when it comes to music in the ice. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of music that could be about the ice, or it's sort of set in an icy realm. That's not really so much what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to look specifically at music where the structure of the music itself is conceived in relation to the conditions of ice or the ways in which we experience ice. And I'll be focusing on the sort of contemporary concert idiom as well as on some of my own work. So to get started, The frozen realms present us with vastness and immensity, scale and power so far beyond the individual person, commanding, quote, worshipful admiration tinged by fear, as Brian quoted Yifu Tuan in his introduction to this series. To capture this, contemporary composers reached to one artistic movement in particular, minimalism. Minimalism essentializes form and materiality while rejecting ornament, sentiment, expression, and autobiography. Minimalist works explore dimension and duration, often with seemingly unapologetic or inhuman scale. Aspects of musical minimalism will be evident throughout today's examples, including unending drones, simplicity of materials, forms deriving from simple processes, and stark contrasts of soft with loud, harmony with disharmony, stasis with motion. In the Sierras, during the last ice age, glaciers flowed over the mountains, polishing them smooth and transporting giant boulders over the granite landscape. That this mysterious California landscape could be attributed to the action of glaciers was first proposed by naturalist, explorer, and environmentalist John Muir. His memoirs from a summer spent tending sheep in the High Sierra in 1869 include an account of this moment of realization, written in his characteristically evocative prose. In 2002, I set some of this prose to music in a work for soprano and saxophone quartet. The music depicts this landscape with prolonged drones behind a stark melody, punctuated by isolated blocks of saxophone harmony standing like boulders in a vast field. In a sense, this is a work about the idea of ice no longer present, but it is really also about the experience of discovery, which becomes apparent over the course of the complete work. So I'll play about a 2-minute excerpt, the text of which the singer sings, you'll see there on the left. American composer John Luther Adams lived in northern Alaska near the Arctic Circle for 40 years. He developed a musical perspective profoundly shaped by the experience of place and the dramatic landscapes of the Arctic. His approach to what he calls sonic geography resonates with a minimalist austerity in which, quote, Sound stands for nothing other than itself, filling time and space with the vivid physical presence of place. He does not imitate the sounds of nature to evoke place, nor does he evoke any specific place through music. Instead, he creates visceral and immersive sonic experiences using acoustic instruments, and sometimes electronics, that overwhelm the individual listener with the same power, force, and immensity one might experience being in the frozen realms. He writes, "The awesome and indifferent forces of nature are stark reminders of the insignificance of our personal dramas and passions. They offer us undeniable reassurance that whatever we may inflict upon ourselves and on one another, there are processes at work in the world far larger, older, and more complex than we can understand." He composes music of grand scale that can be stark and cold or deeply lush and radiant, often organized through systematic, mathematically inspired process, including fractal geometry, arithmetic progressions, and symmetry. These mathematical processes bring to the music a sense of inevitable progression, unencumbered by the need for expression, sentiment, or resolution. Strange and Sacred Noise is a massive 9-movement work for percussion quartet that is rigorously mathematical in its construction and powerfully evocative of the vast and indifferent power of the Arctic landscape. In this movement, the 4 performers play rapidly repeating notes on toms or bass drums, decelerating and then accelerating again according to the graph that you see on the screen. In the same span of time, which is about 10 minutes, one player carries out just 1 deceleration and acceleration. Another carries out 3, another does 5, and another does 7. Let's listen to the beginning, although bearing in mind that listening to this work over small speakers in no way captures the visceral experience of hearing and literally feeling this work in person. So 2 years ago, I was invited to participate in the Polar Sounds Project, led by Cities in Memory and the Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research, wherein over 100 composers were invited to create musical responses to underwater field recordings made in the polar regions. All the works and the associated field recordings can be heard on this Polar Sounds website, and I put a link with that QR code, and some of them also on a compilation CD, which is on Bandcamp. I was assigned the Haunting Calls of the Ross Seal, and I chose to create, it's a very cool seal actually, I chose to create a composition that situates my instrument, the can, the free reed bamboo mouth organ of Laos and northeast Thailand, into an imaginary underwater Antarctic soundscape, comprised of the electronically transformed sound of Ross seals, layers of can sound, and recordings of Weddell seals and other marine life recorded by the McMurdo Oceanographic Observatory. So to start, I'll play a quick recording excerpt of the Ross seal recording. So I composed this piece, Sirens of the Pack Ice. We'll listen to about 2 minutes of the beginning. I'd like to show some works that aren't about the polar regions at all, but that take ice as an essential component of sonic expression. They stem from the same minimalist impetus of embracing the indifferent conditions of the natural world, but on a more modest scale. Los Angeles-based artist Mineko Grimmer crafts sound-producing kinetic sculptures that combine minimalist aesthetics with an approach to process and indeterminacy informed in part by her encounters with composer John Cage. Her constructions employ traditional Japanese carpentry techniques to create an enclosed basin. Above A conical assemblage of pebbles is frozen into a block of ice that slowly melts, dropping water and stones gradually. They fall through sculptural lattices of sound-making surfaces, such as wood, bamboo, or piano wire. These beautiful works highlight the dynamic quality of ice, accepting with a Buddhist sensibility its impermanence and sonically beautifying the inevitable progression towards entropy. We can watch a little bit of video, which is not mine, but it was on YouTube. As promised. So if you want to go back and hear any of those in completion, you can scan that QR code. No. Thank you very much. I
didn't turn my title in on time, but I do have one. It is Ultimate Thule, the Greenland of Gretel Ehrlich. First of all, some things to know about Greenland. Its name is comical. Nothing grows there, only of firs, of mosses and flowers for a few months in the southern fjords. But the Norseman, Eric the Red, who spent much of an exile there, named it Greenland in order to attract settlers to keep him company. Some did. Since the early 19th century, it has been the autonomous territory of Denmark, the largest island in the world, about 5 times the size of California, with roughly the population of La Jolla. 95% of Greenland is an enormous ice pack covering the entire interior, a remnant of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago. The whole island extends well above the Arctic Circle, with the furthest north village in the world. Many people might know Greenland exists only because, in 1988, then President Trump wondered if he could buy it or trade Puerto Rico for it, but the Danish government said it was not for sale. Roughly 80% of Greenland's population are Inuit. That's a word that gets mixed up with Eskimo, and that happens a lot. But generally, the Eskimos settled Alaska and the Canadian Arctic, and the Greenland settlers call themselves Inuit. Now Inuit's replacing Eskimo, probably because of Eskimo bars. Many thousands of years ago, waves of migrants crossed an ice bridge from Siberia. The first wave settled in what is now Alaska, the second in the vast Canadian Arctic. The third wave, around the time of the Norman invasion of England, settled in Greenland. The people of this third migration were called the Thule by an archaeologist who found their earliest remains in the far northwest of Greenland and called this area Thule. A large Air Force base was built on this site to keep an eye on the Germans during World War II and the Russians ever since. The base is also named Thule. Let us ponder this odd word for a minute. Its etymology is fittingly unknown, so we only know what it means through its usage. It was the name given by Greek and Latin geographers to the regions of the far north, which is what Thule means, far north. A later regions stark and sparsely inhabited like Norway. A later phrase, Ultima Thule, furthest north, described an imagined region that no one had been to, only a landscape so difficult to survive in that its denizens had to be imagined as gods or fallen warriors. Or, in the minds of the Thule Society in Germany during World War I, the Aryans, a superior race of people. Adolf Hitler later took up this idea with his visions of an Aryan race of warriors. An interesting contemporary footnote to this is Ron DeSantis' first national campaign video, which featured a huge Sonnenrad or sun wheel, an image from the Thule Society, emerging from the center of a Florida flag with two files of soldiers marching towards it. He promptly fired the white supremacist who had made the video after someone pointed out the source of the image. It remains online. The idea of a far north superior race, white, tall, blonde warriors, is, of course, laughable, considering that those who inhabit the actual Ultima Thules of the world are the Inuit and the Scandinavian Sami and others, dark-skinned, short, and black-haired. They are not warlike, but they are tough as nails and utterly real. In 1844, and I suppose I can get this now. That's the book I'm going to get to. I'm not going to take you through this long poem. I'm just going to read a part of it. In 1844, Edgar Allan Poe published a poem about an Ultima Thule, which he called Dreamland. I have it on a slide, but it's a bit long, so I'll just read the first two stanzas. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only. I love that, ill angels. Where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright. I have reached these lands but newly from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild, weird clime that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time. Bottomless vales and boundless floods, and chasms and caves, and titan woods, with forms that no man can discover for the tears that drip all over. Mountains toppling evermore into seas without a shore, seas that restlessly aspire, surging into skies of fire, lakes that endlessly outspread their lone waters, lone and dead, their still waters, still and chilly, with the snows of the lolling lily. Poe's ultimate dim Thule is at once a place out of space and time and an actual frozen realm, with caves, vales and caves, and toppling mountains like icebergs, and fiery skies, common in the far north. Poe is describing it after having returned from it, after learning he can never be allowed to expose its mysteries. Perhaps if he were allowed to know these mysteries, he would have stayed there, in the realm where his sorrows are soothed and his imagination freed, where the beauty of the place dissolves the binary of the real and the imagined. Gretel Ehrlich's Greenland is often very much like Poe's Thule. She too visits the island. I should put this on again there. She too visits the island as a traveler. She was born in Santa Barbara, and discovers when she experiences months without darkness an unobstructed vision in which the curvature of space-time disappears. And like Poe's speaker, she returned from these mysteries to write about them and went back several times. Her account of her first 2 years is This Cold Heaven, 7 Seasons in Greenland, published in 2001. The subject of my talk stems from this passage of Ehrlich's, quote, "Nothing grew in the Arctic except the imagination," unquote. I will be tracing this growth from vision to visionary to environmental consciousness. On the evidence of this book, which includes not only Ehrlich's thoughts and descriptions, but those of other visitors, Danish natives, Inuit hunters, in addition to recounting the travels of the great explorer Knud Rasmussen. It seems to be true that one's imagination grows because it is involved in seeing a reality that seems imaginary in the first place. Poe would be pleased. In one of his stories, he invented a trans-Canadian railroad 40 years before the building of it was begun and 175 years before it was completed. And he described what it was like to be traveling on it at the speed of sound. This is in the early 19th century. He made it seem real. Greta Ehrlich, living in a whole season of darkness when she first arrives, says, quote, "I am trying to understand how one proceeds from blindness to seeing, from seeing to vision." She understands she is only a visitor. For example, she cannot truly see the ice scape because her survival is not at stake, as it is for the Greenlanders. She stays with them in their small houses, gets to know them, and goes along on dog sled hunts, but her book is marked by how her own imagination grows in this crazy distance from what she has known. On one dog sled hunt, she says, "Once I had everything. Now it is lost. Then the losing of it is lost." This losing, what she had, becomes a process of gaining vision. And to my mind, that's what's at the heart of her book. Not creating imagined landscapes like Poe, and not familiarizing ourselves with them, but giving herself over to the spectacle. Her title, "This Cold Heaven," evokes both a frigid reality and a place where gods could be in a landscape worthy of them. That landscape has stirred the imagination of people for a long time. Ehrlich quotes a brief passage from St. Brendan the Navigator, who in the 6th century sailed from the far west of Ireland across the North Atlantic toward what he thought of as the Blessed Isles, a way of saying, "I have no idea what's out there except the gods." He was in his 70s. His account of his 7-year voyage on small boats made mostly of ox hides became a medieval bestseller. He surely came across what we know as Iceland or Greenland, where he found a group of Irish monks, and may have gotten as far as Labrador. The path of his voyage was much studied 7 centuries later by Columbus. Ehrlich quotes St. Brendan's description of an iceberg. Quote, "A floating crystal palace, the color of silver veil, yet hard as marble, and the sea around it as smooth as glass and as white as milk." Blessed Isle indeed. In recording this strangeness, he gives the iceberg's reality the quality of vision, the imagery of dream that is matched over and over again by Ehrlich. What is seen is the sheer otherness of something completely real. This Cold Heaven is full of such passages. I have gathered a number of them together into an extended scene of subsistence hunting by dog sled. Hundreds of pounds on the sled, dozens of dogs in the traces. All of the words are Ehrlich's. I just put them together and changed verb tenses when necessary. In the gilded silver silence, we were tiny dots riding a wooden splinter across infinity, our eyes filled with Arctic sights, changing planes of light, clipped turrets of stranded icebergs, drifting islands of fog, the undersong of the four-legged dog trot, the fibrillation of trace lines vibrating, and the waltz of sequined snow across a universe of ice. Our eyes were drenched, not with water or snow or tears, but with the refulgence, the blue glint, the shiver, the dove-graved snow flushing iridescence. Everywhere, the shifting ice was saffron, then pink, then indigo. the austerity of it, both of voluptuousness and of feral clarity. Icebergs, continents with their own inlets and fjords, sharp peaks and weather, continents slid by, white mountains of drifting beneath the immobile black walls of distant islands, the ice cap bulging like a bulb. They make sounds like someone beating on sheet metal. Their turrets collapse. Ahead, the horizon is a silver pin laid at the edge of the universe beyond an ocean of light. Snow blurs the glacier's top edge, but the ice wall remains translucent, all precision facets, fused diamonds that harden into turquoise. Unquote. That's gathered from various parts. It is this beauty, clear vision becoming visionary, that the American illustrator and painter Rockwell Kent tried to capture in landscapes when he lived in Greenland in the 30s. Ehrlich reads his book about Greenland, Salamina, while visiting the town where Kent lived, and quotes his saying that, quote, in Greenland, one discovers, as though for the first time, what beauty is. On the basis of his icescapes, this beauty is still a presence of a huge theatrical backdrop looming over the diminished activities of man going about its business. I'm going to go through these quickly because I realize I'm running late. There's one. The dogs present to not only to indicate the size of the snow mountain, but how we got there. And if you could open it up, this is him painting it. You'll notice the architectural stuff, the clarity of it, the halo of light behind it, the way that the receding mountains there do not get more faded as they are. I'll just go through these. There's another and another. The black water, and here are the places where they dry skins from their hunting and go about their business in that incredible landscape. I wish I could say more about them, but I'm going to move on. Derek should be here to talk about them. Okay. While St. Brendan and Ehrlich and Kent capture these landscapes, freezing them as they are frozen, it is crucial to know that in reality they are always shifting, rising, crumbling, splitting, flowing, an immensity of huge forms in motion in the midst of changing weather. Weather is the key because the survival of the Greenlanders depends on being able to anticipate and respond to it. The path of the dog sled will depend on the shifts in the ice, and the shifts will determine what animals are to be hunted or can't be hunted. On one dog sled trip, Ehrlich asked a Danish Greenlander what was most important to know when living on the ice. He said, everything. She writes, quote, which meant the thickness and kinds of ice, variations in snow, the presence and absence of fog, wind direction, kinds of clouds, zodiacal lights, and the phases of the moon, air, wind and water temperatures, the changing shape of the shoreline, location of open water, number of birds, dates of migrations and of breakup and first ice, and the changes in routines of all land animals. The weather itself and the consciousness of it, a kind of weather in the mind, is what the Inuit called Sila, S-I-L-A, a shape-changing power behind the natural world. To be conscious of the wild shifts and moods of the weather takes a lifetime and is as necessary as avoiding accident and starvation on the ice. It is a lifetime of learning how to see, a phrase with which Ehrlich concludes her book. She knows that she hasn't experienced that lifetime, that she is along for the ride with the hunters. But as a result for her, how to see is distinct from Scylla. Her life doesn't depend on seeing the landscape. It depends on the hunters seeing it. But she learns how to get past her own subjectivity as much as she can. She includes only scattershot references to her personal life. Her epigraph is from Emerson, "I am nothing, I see all." Her discipline of seeing a world beyond her normal sight and seeing all of it, or as much as she can, is the work of a visionary. 9 years after the publication of My Cold Heaven, Ehrlich tried to extend her vision into an Inuit-type consciousness. In another book, The Empire of Ice, Encounters in a Changing Landscape, 2010, she describes the accumulating effects of climate change on the Greenlanders. Through no fault of their own, their only way of life has been deeply affected from the 1970s on by the warming and polluting of the Arctic waters, mainly from the U.S. and from the nuclear trash of the Thule Air Base. Of course, the melting and shifting of the ice disrupts the hunting that is life itself, especially for the Inuit. Not surprisingly, Ehrlich again brings up Scylla, a natural force never depicted, never anthropomorphized, which makes no distinction between weather and consciousness. What is more natural than weather and more godlike? For Greenlanders, Scylla can be understood as both practical and visionary. She writes, "Deep ecology in the Arctic means that the sound of the walruses' clicks and whistles, humming whales, and the ululating songs of bearded seals rise through the kayak paddle. One's whole body becomes a listening post, receiving messages from under the ice. How we see and know a place is partly shaped by the language we speak. There is no word in English like Scylla. It links natural facts and human meaning and the Inuit hunter's world of together doing, knowing things directly. The Greenlandic way of life is, in this sense, a model of environmental awareness, born of necessity, community, and visionary imagination. Not unreal visions like Thule or exotic landscapes, but visions of our shared necessities in the midst of the stronger power of nature, which we must work with and not against. Scylla is that nature, and it is inside ourselves as well. It exists because we are aware of it. Paying attention to the weather is paying attention to yourself and those around you. Gretel Ehrlich makes the oft-forgotten point that the word primitive does not mean underdeveloped. It means first. The Inuit are indeed the first, and it's the white man who is undeveloped. Having a visionary consciousness can lead us to the reality that surrounds us and that we depend on as surely as the Inuit depend on ice. Thank you.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here again. Thank you, Brian, for having me. It turns out I should have talked to Fred. There's a lot of overlap here in what I'm talking about and what he's talking about. Also, I discovered slightly late that I should have made the font bigger on my writing here, so I might fumble and squint, so bear with me. Rockwell Kent, that Fred was just talking about. Didn't know he was going to do that, but really eerie and fabulous. All right, so I think this landscape, the frozen realm, lends itself more to the imaginative, fictional creation of an internal landscape than other types. It's seemingly blank and monochromatic. Yeah, there we go. This is Ebba Stiven, friend of the center. It's largely inhospitable. You can't go there easily. The landscape does not welcome you, and in fact, it seems to repel you. It's very easy to see and think about as a kind of dreamscape, a place of this world, but at the same time, not quite. Also Emma Stiven. And so it presents a place for all kinds of emotional projection and metaphorical possibilities. As I thought about this, the more I noticed or I felt this distance between the reality of the place and the image of it. I began to think about the idea or the notion or the critical theory of the map and the territory. So, I lost my place. This is Antarctica. This is a map of Antarctica. This is the territory. You can go there. You can be there. You can walk it. This is, it's not a facsimile. It's an approximation, a sort of abstraction, if you will. Another way of saying this is the distance between the word in a thing, the thing in an object, or way more simply, the real and the imagined. This is Magritte's famous pipe. This is not a pipe, okay? You can't touch it, you can't light it, you can't smoke it. It's a picture of a pipe. However, if I look at it long enough and I think about it enough, I can imaginatively enter that space. I can persuade myself that I smell it, that I taste it, that it's a real thing. Magritte's title for this is The Treachery of Images, which I stole because I like it a lot, and I think he would understand. The surrealists, of course, they were interested in the unconscious, and I think that many writers have instinctively understood that this frozen landscape, or understood it as an excellent analog for that, for the unconscious, the hidden, the inaccessible regions of the self. The desire that many characters, literary characters, characters in literature, harbor to go to this landscape is pretty irrational. The place itself, the territory, is dangerous, but it turns out that sometimes so is the image, the map of the place in fiction and the pull it exerts on the imagination. Okay, here's Frankenstein. He's about to throw himself into the abyss, thinking about his sister, wife, or something. It's what those guys. So, I'm not going to talk about all of Frankenstein. There's so much good work on Frankenstein. I don't have anything to add. I'm going to confine myself to the beginning bits of it. It has a framing device. There, it's bookended with letters from the wannabe polar explorer Robert Walton, who's on his way to the North Pole. He's writing these letters to his sister. Of course he is. She has clearly expressed her dismay at this, and she has regarded it with evil forebodings. For him, he tells us this is a favorite dream of his early years, to go to the North Pole. He grew up on his grandfather's library of sea voyages, and he nurtures these daydreams. However, where he really gets his ideas from is Coleridge. And this is the Gustave Doré. These are the famous woodcuts of this. He says to his sister, I've often attributed my attachment to, my passionate enthusiasm for the dangerous mysteries, to that most imaginative of poets, Coleridge. So his desire is not necessarily for a real place, the real North. It's for a fictional one, a place he's constructed in his imagination based on his reading and his looking. Nope, don't want to go there, don't look. He tells her, there's something at work in my soul which I do not understand, something that finds expression in the depictions of the place. He tells us he's a practical person, and yet, there's a love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous, which hurries me out of the common pathways of men to the unvisited regions I am about to explore. He continues, now you can look. My daydreams become more fervent and vivid. I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation. It ever presents itself in my imagination as the region of beauty and delight. So what he does is, oh, that's not the right slide. What the hell? No, sorry, don't look. There it is. Okay. So what he does here is he just runs absolutely roughshod over what he knows to be true, that it's dangerous, in favor of the much more seductive lure of his imagined space. This, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, is not a happy story. It doesn't go well for the mariner, right? This is, and he seems to ignore that in his reading as well. So he gets to the North Pole. His ship gets trapped in ice, just like, Coleridge. And Victor Frankenstein turns up in his little ice boat, chasing down his monster. For Walton, for my purposes too, for Walton, Frankenstein becomes the reality check. He tells Walton what happens when you enter the dream or the marvelous and you leave the real world. Victor says, I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be the serpent that stings you. And he tells him the Frankenstein tale. And the important thing here is that Walton listens. He turns around. His conscious self, his rational self, whatever self of his that's on the precipice of disaster and death, reasserts itself, and he goes home. Right, so that's important. This I just put in here because I like it. It's fan art, and you can get a lot of this on the internet. It's a real map. These are real places. Over here, it's the approximate routes of Robert Walton, Victor Frankenstein, and the monster. What I love about it is these aren't real people. They've been mapped onto a map. I like that whole kind of thing. Jane Eyre is where we're going. This is not Jane Eyre. This is Charlotte Bronte. These are illustrations from Buick's British Birds. This was from The Guardian because this book sold for a whole lot of money in 2015. And I'm going to talk about it. There it is. Buick's British Birds, Volume 2, Water Birds. This is a very special book for lots of reasons. The biggest reason is, no, it's not the biggest reason. One of the reasons is we have this book here at USD in special collections. 1880, Diane? Was it 1880, I think, the edition that we have?
Yeah, it's a memorial.
It's a memorial edition. I have a paperback, and the illustrations, you can't really see them, and so I thought, maybe a library has one. It turns out we have it. So Diane went and dug it out of special collections, and we spent a great afternoon looking at it and talking about it and thinking about it. So you should go see it if you get a chance. It's very charming. So Buick, Thomas Buick, he was inspired by a memoir of birds in Greenland, which was printed apparently alongside William Edward Parry's Journal of a Voyage to the Northwest Passage. What I really like and what's particularly interesting is that he couldn't go to the north. He didn't have access to it, so he made the drawings for the woodcuts for museums. He went up into Scandinavia and he looked at dioramas and taxidermy. And if you look at the illustrations, the birds are they're a little stuffed. But it's very charming, and I like it because it connects to the photographs that we have in here of the polar bears in the dioramas. It's nice. So, Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre famously opens with the line, "There was no possibility of a walk that day because the weather is bad." The weather inside of Jane is bad also. She's in a very bad way. She's an unwanted orphan. She's sent to live with a cold and punishing aunt and her obnoxious bully cousin. She's very frustrated and she's very angry. She spends fully 90% of the novel in a rage. She hides herself in a window seat, which is a very Bronte thing to do, and she covers herself with a curtain. She calls it scarlet. It's scarlet drapery, and she wraps it around herself. And she pulls down a book. What book does she pull down? Buick's British Birds, Volume 2. The Bronte children also had this book. It was beloved by them, and Charlotte and Branwell, in fact, used it to teach themselves to draw, and it was part of their estate later on. She pulls that down in her little hidey hole, and she loses herself in the pictures. She thinks about, she says, the vast sweep of the Arctic zone, those forlorn regions of dreary space, the fields of ice, the centuries of winter, the rigors of extreme cold. Of those death-white realms, I formed an idea of my own. She's very taken with the vignettes. There are all these little tiny vignettes in the book, which really, the slides don't do them justice. You got to go look at them, and they have little stories in them. And this is the cormorant that's over here, and there's one that has a wreck that she particularly likes. She says, each picture told a story mysterious to my undeveloped understanding and imperfect feelings. She clearly identifies and projects herself onto these images. Oh no, what happened? There it is. God. Maggie, this is my greatest fear, that these things happen. Okay, it's fine. All right. Where was I? She's projecting herself onto the images. She is the lone rock buffeted by the storm, or the lone cormorant standing proud and unharmed. She says, with Buick on my knee, I was happy at least in my own way, because she's Jane Eyre. So poor little Jane, hot, angry, red-wrapped little Jane, she finds deep freeze for her emotions in this landscape. But then her wicked cousin John, he bursts into her hiding place. He snatches the book out of her hands and he hurls it at her head, hits her. She bleeds all over the place, which is a very Bronte thing because the fire and ice thing. It is very Bronte. Fire and ice and red is all over the place in Bronte. It cuts her. He tattles. She's blamed for the incident. She's locked in the infamous Red Room of Literature where her rage consumes her and she loses consciousness. This is gratuitous. Mike Meyer had a gratuitous slide in his show, so I got to have one too. This is fan art. This is Jane in the Red Room. This is what she's thinking. Just, okay. I really love that. So the point I'm making here is of this imaginative retreat into the imaginative Arctic soothes Jane and brings her some relief. But then the reality check comes when the vehicle of her escape, the book, literally whacks her in the head. The place is not real. It's a comforting image, a temporary seduction. However much she wishes or imagines, she is not a cormorant in Arctic seas. Okay, let's move on from Jane. I know, that was inappropriate. We're all adults. You can do it. Here, moving far away. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, here we are. This is Mary Louise Parker in Angels in America, the HBO version of it. If you've ever read Tony Kushner's Angels in America, you know it's really good, or seen it. It's a great play. You'll also know it's about a lot of things, but one of them is not the Arctic, except Act 3, Scene 3. Harper, she's a young Mormon woman who's come to New York from Utah with her husband. He's coming to terms with his sexuality, but not necessarily letting her in on this. Although she knows a lot of things that she can't let herself know. She's terribly sad. She's terribly lonely, and she's afraid. She says, "Why am I not dead? If your heart's broken, you're supposed to be dead, right?" It's very sad. She's stuck in an apartment in Brooklyn all day long. She listens to the radio, and she takes handfuls of Valium. On the radio, she hears about the ozone and Antarctica, and she's really taken with this idea of the place at the end of the world that's so cold and uninhabited. She hallucinates a travel agent. She calls him Mr. Lies, and she begs him to take her away. And he does. She finds herself in this landscape. And she says, "Snow, ice, mountains of ice. I feel better, I feel better. Where am I?" And he says, "The kingdom of ice, the bottommost part of the world, Antarctica. Cold shelter for the shattered. No sorrow here. Tears freeze." And she's ecstatic. She says, "I can live here forever." And then he tells her the rough truth. He says, "This is a retreat, a vacuum, a deep freeze for feelings. You can be numb and safe here." However, he adds, "for as long as it lasts, ice has a way of melting." She knows, in her unconscious, her rational self, wherever, that Mr. Lies, because Mr. Lies he's a creation of her imagination, that she can't go there and she can't stay there because there's no there. It's an imagined place. This is also from HBO. He's probably going to send me a cease and desist letter. And I love this set because it's the Arctic, and this is the refrigerator from her Brooklyn apartment, and there's a Coke machine, and this is the iconic. This is looks like the Shackleton ship, yeah, and the Endurance. Thank you. I knew you would all know. It's the wreck of her marriage stuck in the ice. So it's really, and she's got a great snowsuit. So I'm going to move far away from here. I'm going to Everest. And just so you know, Mike, I know that Everest is not at either of the poles. Okay? When I think, I don't know, you science people, you think we don't know stuff. Yeah. So the reason I'm doing, well, for lots of reasons, but one of the things is I think that Everest, trekking Everest, going to Everest, has replaced this notion of the 19th century of going to the North Pole, right? It's because it's quasi-accessible. Yeah, if you want to train hard enough and have some cash, you too can go there. And so it's on people's bucket lists and things like that. So this is another thing that happened to me, like Buick's birds. I was really frustrated. I didn't know what I was going to talk about, and I was thinking about lots of things, and I was actually whining to Tyler, who's not here. And I went back to my office, and above my desk I have a massive bulletin board. And I was sitting there, and I just looked up, and I had pinned this obituary from 2018, it's from the New York Times, to my board because I had found it very moving at the time. This is Nobukatsu Kuriki. He wasn't a writer. He was not in the conventional sense. He didn't write fiction. He wasn't a journalist. But he was a prolific writer of blogs and Facebook posts and tweets. He died at 35 on Everest in 2018 on what was his 8th attempt to summit. He could have summited many times before if he had chosen to take normal routes with groups in a sensible season and if he had used oxygen. On one of his climbs, he had frostbite so severely, he lost 9 of his fingers to the joint. But then he taught himself to use his gear with his stumps. Take that down for you so you don't have to look at it. Between his climbs, he spoke all over Japan, lectured about what he called breaking down the barriers of negativity. Sometimes he called it the mountain of negativity. He felt that people were shut down in their dreams before they even began them, and that they feared failure too much. He wanted people, he said, to please cherish the craziness we have in ourselves. James Rison, the author of his obituary, writes, Kariki dreamed of a world where people supported each other. Filming and streaming and tweeting, he shared the same lesson over and over again. Risks could be accepted because failure could be accepted. On the day of the climb that killed him, he didn't feel well. He had a fever and a cough. At 7,400 meters, he posted publicly, I'm climbing Everest, feeling the difficulties and pains, but appreciating them. I hope to keep climbing in spirit with you all. And then he called his team and said he was in a bad way. He offers a collective dream. Kariki dreamed of the mountain and he went to the mountain, but the literal and the figurative became entwined. The boundary between dream life and waking life became porous. I need to feel the mountain when I climb, he said, hence no oxygen. Maybe, being lightheaded helps with visions. A friend of his said, at some point, his goal was not to summit, but to expose himself to the toughest conditions imaginable, and share them with people, a collective dream. He mapped himself onto the territory because there are currently no more maps available that approximate the uncharted, unexplored territory he sought, and so had to go so far off-piste, literally and figuratively, to try and find the way. All right, so to sum up all of this, this is Everest. It's actually not Everest. This is the treachery of images. This is Norway. That's Emma Stibben. Just wanted to see if you'd get that. Yeah. But this is Everest. And so just to look at it for a second, it's fantastical, it's magical, it's marvelous, so close to heaven, so close to God. Right? You can project all kinds of things on it. And now, it's semi-accessible to you, too. Here are ads for going there. Everest trekking with kids. This is not a dream. This is a nightmare. What is wrong with people? I thought this was great. I love this. There's Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Norgay at the top of Everest because, do you know what? He wore a Rolex, in case you didn't know. And you can buy one too. You can't because you can't afford it, none of you. But it is called the Explorer. His did not look like this. So the point here is that if you have enough cash and a Rolex and you train, you too can go to Everest. However, this is also Everest. And this is Everest. So what I see here is a crash in real time of a dreamscape and an unpleasant reality. Yeah. Here's Noboru Katsu Kariki being taken off the mountain for the final time. This is also Everest and a reality of it. So, all of this. Here's my bulletin board. There's Noboru Katsu Kariki down there right under Patty Hearst and her machine gun. And this is very revealing. I probably should not have put this slide up. But what I like so much here, and my point that I'm really trying to make here, and what I just really like so much is, here am I imagine and I romanticize Noboru Katsu Kariki and his Everest, just like Charlotte Bronte imagined her creation, Jane Eyre, imagining herself as an Arctic bird from a book. It's a kind of inherited literary, fanciful dream legacy of the Arctic, of the cold, of these landscapes. The frozen realm is a landscape on which to map our love or our need for the marvelous. And I think built into that, importantly, is that the marvelous must be kept. It must be kept just out of reach. Its power and its romance and the blankness that allows us to map ourselves onto it can become lost when the inhospitable or the inaccessible becomes accessible in the real world. For example, trash on Everest. It's like a dog catching the car. It loses its magnetic pull. And here, I like to think of this. This is Noboru Katsu Kariki, forever walking into the marvelous. And that's it.